Hello, and welcome to this installment of the Future Grind podcast. I am your host, Ryan O'Shea, and in this episode, I'll be speaking with well-known biohacker and transhumanist Rich Lee. Rich first came to the public eye in 2013 when he had magnets that served as headphones implanted into his ears, meaning that he could listen to music or receive data wirelessly directly into his head. Rich has also experimented with implanted armor and is known for his work on the Lovetron 9000, an implantable device designed to enhance intercourse. We discuss sensory substitution, the importance of safety, some potentially horrifying uses of virtual reality and image recognition, and more. This conversation does contain some adult themes. They are nothing too graphic, but I will provide another warning when we're moving on to those topics. Once again, we remind you that the thoughts of the guests on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Future Grind or myself, and also a reminder that biohacking is dangerous and things can go wrong. I strongly advise against self-surgery of any kind, and you should consult with a trained medical doctor before moving forward with any type of human augmentation. As always, show notes and more are available at futuregrind.org. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are found. A video version of this episode is posted on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure to subscribe on all of these platforms, leave a review, and you can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. This is Future Grind. Okay, and now we are here with Rich. Rich, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you first came into the public eye during the summer of 2013, when you had magnets implanted into the tragus of each ear, which were essentially used as implanted headphones. Through the use of an external coil, these implanted magnets could actually pass along audio from your phone or another device. Your augmentation was featured by Humanity Plus magazine, Popular Science, Gizmodo, and many more. Talk to me about the creation of this device. Where did the idea come from, and what inspired you to take action on it?
Well, initially the goal to have implanted headphones came from the Biohack Me forums. There are several pages discussing different possibilities, and there was a wide range of feasibilities with each one or some hurdles with each one. And so I didn't contribute much on that topic, other than it was just always in the back of my mind. I always saw it as something that could be potentially really powerful. And so I was just kind of like on the lookout for basically something that could fill that function and be like an implanted headphone. I had some personal reasons for doing that too. One morning I had woke up and one of my eyes was just really blurry. I thought it was going to go away, and I didn't really pay too much attention to it at first. I just kind of ignored it, and it just kind of didn't go away. So I went to the doctor, and he told me that basically I had a degenerative eye condition, and that my other one would be going any time. At that point, I'd be legally blind, or darn near legally blind, and I basically wouldn't be able to drive, and I'd have to get on a waiting list for a cornea transplant. And at the time, I definitely didn't have money for a cornea transplant. That was something that I wanted to avoid shopping for. So I was kind of left with this like inevitability that I was going to be losing my job. I wouldn't have a way to provide for my family, and basically would kind of be a burden on those around me if I was trying to navigate, with very limited vision. And so I started researching into like echolocation and methods used by blind people to navigate their surroundings. So I thought, I don't want to go around making clicking noises everywhere I go to produce like audio cues on where objects are around me. I didn't want to disturb others around me, but I also wanted to be proactive about being able to navigate once this event did occur and I lost my other eye. So to me, I was thinking that if I took some implanted headphones, maybe like another device that had like an ultrasonic chirper or something in the ultrasound range that people couldn't hear, that I could use those clicks and then translate that audio into something that is in the human audible range, and then be able to navigate without anyone knowing that I was doing it. And so initially that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't really sure how to do it. And then there was an Instructable that I found online that somebody had made that was titled something like Covert Invisible Headphones or something like that. And it was basically a set of magnets that were put into the ear canal and then a coil of wire that would transmit audio. And basically students were using these things to cheat on tests. And so they would have like basically a bunch of answers that were like on loop that would play into this coil that nobody else would notice, and nobody else would see the magnets in their ear canals against their eardrums that were vibrating in response to this coil and producing sound. And so they could basically cheat on tests this way. And so I checked it out and I thought, oh, that's pretty clever. And then I looked at some stories that people were telling about using them successfully and things like that. And I thought, well, okay, this is really low-hanging fruit because, magnets were already doing that. All we're going to need to do here is take magnets and implant those in the ear, and then it should work. And sure enough, it did. I went down to Las Vegas, and Steve Hayworth helped implant these things in my tray guy. That was the area that I determined might be the best place to implant these. People have since implanted them in different areas, and I'm not sure how much better their experience is. I know that some people have implanted them on cheekbones, and I thought I was really hopeful for that, but apparently it didn't work as well as we thought it would. Anyhow, so overall, it worked. I plugged in my device, and after messing around with it for a bit, I heard audio for the first time. It just happened to be a lecture that Kevin Warwick was giving on YouTube. I heard his voice coming through my implants, and I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. I was trying to play some music, but his voice started coming through.
I think that's a very fitting one to be the first thing you heard.
Yeah, totally. I thought so too. So I was blown away, I thought that's amazing, and strong enough that you could hear. If you're in a really quiet area, then you could totally listen to audio, take phone calls, and things like that. If you have any like background noise or things like that, that's when it gets tricky because nothing's obstructing the ear canal at this point. These implants are just implanted in my tragus, and so because there's nothing obstructing the ear canal, you get basically background noise that will come in and overwhelm what you're trying to listen to. So it's kind of got to be used in a quiet area. But after that, basically, I just went crazy and I started, because, in the grinder community, we're really into like sensory substitution and things like that. So, I'm hooking it up to all kinds of different things. Basically anything with an audio jack, I was putting it in like a contact microphone, now I can hear through walls. I did another one where I had these implants hooked up to a contact microphone on my ankle. And basically I was walking down a walking trail and there's like nobody around me. And then I just heard these like booming footsteps coming towards me. And I just couldn't pinpoint, where this booming noise was coming from. And then sure enough, like an eighth to a quarter of a mile up the trail, I see this 110-pound woman jogging. And she's the one that's making this like booming noise. I was really blown away. I was like, wow, I'm picking up her footsteps like that far away. And, part of that was the conduction in the asphalt, but still pretty impressive. So anyhow, I've done all kinds of different experiments like that. I've listened to my ex-wife's heartbeat, kind of like a stethoscope. Heat sensor was a really cool one. Basically, we had heat measurements that were basically measured through a thermometer, range thermometer that was like translated into a number. And so basically we just translated that number into a audio tune, and I could, look in a direction and basically hear heat at a distance, which was kind of cool.
And you had a Harvard researcher that found out about your work reach out to you to help. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. After I got the implants and everything, I tried to do the echolocation thing, but it just failed miserably. Actually, so in biohacking and in grinding, I'd say 95% of all my projects are failures, but it's always led to new knowledge. And I've always come away with like a better understanding of the exact problem and, the things that I need to do to overcome these problems. And so this was basically the case with the echolocation. It just failed, and I wasn't exactly sure why. The audio quality just wasn't good. I just couldn't get it to work out. And I was on NPR discussing the failure and also the other things that I was doing with the implants. And there was a former a retired Harvard professor that heard the show and then contacted me through the show. And we talked, and he basically told me some really fascinating things about echolocation. And these are things that I'm still working on to this day. But it was a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's great to see that some of the academics are taking an interest in this and are stepping up to support this work. I love the idea of getting audio delivered directly to the head, without the need for headphones. Unfortunately, your device still requires some external hardware, such as the coil. Do you see this existing as a fully contained implantable device at some point?
Definitely at some point. I think as electronics become smaller, in fact, that there may come a day where it's just injected. And so maybe we have something that's RFID sized or maybe longer, but it's something that is an injectable hearing device. And then I think hearable technology will really take off at that point.
So it sounds like you were interested in augmenting your hearing, in part to make up for shortcomings with your vision. Are the vision problems what got you introduced to biohacking and transhumanism, or were those interests that you had before?
So those are interests that I had before, and I've been working in the biohacking sphere since long before that. It's basically something that I just identified as being something that could be very personal and that I could just be motivated to really go after. Before that, I wanted superpowers, and so this just looked like a good fit.
While I think superpowers are a good motivation, biohacking is definitely one way to get those. So how did you end up finding biohacking and transhumanism then?
So that's kind of a long story, but after the death of my grandmother in like 2008, I really got into transhumanism hard and actively, and was looking for ways to upgrade myself after her death. I just thought, what if I die without realizing all these things that are, being promised right now by futurists and things like that. So I thought I was like the only person in the world crazy enough to like proactively be out there looking for things, ways to augment myself, either biologically or cybernetically or whatever. And I hadn't even heard of the term transhumanism or biohacking at that point. And then I ran across a talk by Left Anonym, or an article by Left Anonym in Humanity Plus magazine. I just happened to stumble on it. Somebody posted a Facebook link or something. And so I read it and I was just like, wow, these people are doing exactly what I've been trying to do for like the last couple years. And I thought I was all alone. And here's these terms, transhumanism and, biohacking and things like that. And so I basically jumped on to Left's blog and got involved in the comments section. And in honesty, like when I first came on, I was kind of like, are these guys serious? Is this really a thing? Are these guys messing around? And I didn't take them too seriously. And that was stupid of me because people were dead serious and collaborations were happening. And I basically got sucked into it and was 100% on board ever since.
Yeah, I know of a few leaders in this movement, including Tim Cannon, who have gotten interested in biohacking from discovering Left Anonym. And Left was actually a guest on episode 12 of this podcast, so if anyone out there doesn't know Left's story, that's definitely one to check out. I'll link to it in the show notes at futuregrind.org. So let's talk about you a bit. Where did you grow up? What's your educational background? And what has your career path been?
So I grew up in Southern California mostly, and my parents moved around a lot. My background has kind of been all over the place. I started my first business when I was 20, and I was kind of a serial entrepreneur after that, doing different things. And I got involved in real estate investments and in day trading. So I messed around there, made some good money. And really, I was mostly into business. And I worked overseas. I lived in Hong Kong for 2 years, setting up offices for U.S. and Australian companies and throughout China and getting them established inside of China, which paid fantastically. And then I came home back to the U.S. and hopped right back into real estate. My wife at the time was having our daughter, and we decided to come home and have our daughter here in the States. Anyhow, so there was the big housing crisis, kind of wiped out a lot of things there and a lot of different financial challenges that I ran into, and was pretty much set back to zero at some point. And, I'd been working on all this biohacking stuff. When I did have money, I was looking for things that, to buy and, get involved in and things like that. And then I was basically financially devastated and found Left, who was working on a zero budget, basically hacking components out of computers and things like that. And I kind of felt some hope because I thought, you know what, honestly, maybe it's something I don't need a ton of money for. And so I was able to get involved in biohacking on a low budget. But yeah, so before that, I mean, basically, I didn't have any biology background, hardly any science knowledge outside of just high school. I don't have a degree to speak of. I went to some community college for a bit. Anyway, so I just didn't really have a formal education either, so it was all kind of new to me. But I have started a lot of businesses, and one thing I guess I learned there is that I'm basically not intimidated by something that's new, and I don't mind asking questions. I don't mind looking stupid if I'm going to walk away with, more knowledge than I had before. So the biohacking thing really didn't intimidate me too much. It was just more of a matter of, sticking my neck out there and asking a tremendous amount of questions and not really caring what other people thought, and then just trying to do whatever I could, execute.
You mentioned that the vast majority of your biohacking projects are failures, so let's get into one of those. You and I have discussed your attempt at implantable armor, and while the initial tests didn't work out, this is still a fascinating concept. The idea of having essentially on-demand armor at all times is definitely intriguing. So what's the story with the armor, and what happened when you tried it?
Yeah, basically, the armor had been the concept that was going around on the forums for at least 4 years. And so there are a lot of different things being tried. So this is something that I definitely can't take credit for pioneering or even doing that much research into, to be honest with you. I just saw that some of my friends had done it successfully and implanted lengths of this armor, which was essentially a non-Newtonian foam. It was shoved into a biocompatible tube and sealed. And what this foam does is it's flexible and soft until it's struck hard, and then it becomes like rock hard. So the idea was, you could stick lengths of this tube into like under your skin, and then if you receive an impact there or something like that, then it's going to absorb some of your damage. And so I just thought, oh, that's pretty badass. I would like to have that on my shins. If I smack it on my coffee table, which I do quite often, it's like maybe I could just shrug it off. Before me, Mark Dirksen had implanted the length of it at his wrist and had no complications. He later took it out and like analyzed it and things like that. But so anyhow, I implanted this in my shins, and that was a rough procedure, really rough. The recovery was even rougher. And ultimately, I had to take the implants out. And in the end, the moral of that story, or the thing that I learned, was that implanting things below the belt is kind of tricky, specifically in your legs. I mean, basically, the vascular nature of the legs is a little bit different than I imagined. During the recovery process, every time I got up from a sitting position, I just have these, intense pains in my legs. It's kind of like if your legs fall asleep and they're like really asleep, and you stand up and you start walking, and you just have like pains in your feet and legs. It was kind of the same situation. My legs were getting inflamed, and so basically, I just thought, oh, I feel great. It's in. Everything's gonna be fine. I didn't really pay attention to it as much as I should have. I wasn't as diligent, and I had to pull them. They rejected. And then since then, like talking to other body modification people, they've all told me like, oh, you're implanting something in your legs, you're just crazy. Implants have the hardest time in legs for some reason. And I didn't know that. In fact, I should have just looked into it more and asked around. I didn't know that was a thing. So if somebody wanted to go and take the same armor and say implant it in their arms or something like that, we've had people implant lengths in their arms temporarily and then pull them out. But if somebody wanted to do that permanently in their arms or upper body, I'm sure that'd be just a fine thing to implant.
Just a note for the audience here, we're about to get into some adult subject matter. I don't think it's anything too graphic or vulgar, but we will likely allude to rape and sexual assault. So if that's something you would like to avoid hearing, now is the time to skip ahead. In February of 2018, you gave a talk at the Bodyhack's Human Augmentation Conference in Austin on the subject of the technology-enhanced future of sex, and I think this was actually one of the most well-received talks of the entire conference, but it was also quite terrifying. You talked about the potential of using facial recognition to identify people on the internet, essentially meaning that if someone has a photo online, including nude photos, that they could be identified and that image could be found by anyone. And this could be taken a step further with advanced video editing and virtual reality. Images of anyone could be used to create photorealistic versions of them in any situation, and you could do whatever you want with them in virtual reality. And this could include children as well. I know our mutual friend James Young recently hosted a documentary program for the BBC in which he explored the future of sex robots. And he was quite emotionally affected when he came across some of these dolls that appear to be designed to look like minors. I'm quite conflicted on these issues. Part of me wants to say that this is no different than what happens today with video games or art or adult products currently on the market, that there is no harm caused, and that if there is no victim, there shouldn't be a problem. However, abusing a non-conscious thing, such as a virtual being or a robot that resembles a physical person, might not cause suffering to that object, but the act of abusing the object could cause others to suffer. For example, we don't often think that a corpse is conscious or can suffer in any way, yet many places have abuse of corpse laws on the books, with language that defines abuse of a corpse as anything that would, quote, outrage ordinary family sensibilities. But people disrespect and mistreat non-conscious objects all the time. Flags are often disrespected in a way that causes emotional pain to some, and people are burnt in effigy as acts of protest. Many of our actions cause suffering to others, and I wouldn't argue that that warrants making them illegal. So I really don't know what to make of this. One other possible concern is what effect that this could have on the person who engages in these acts. Yale psychologist Paul Bloom and neuroscientist Sam Harris recently wrote about this, using the HBO series Westworld as an example. In Westworld, advanced robots indistinguishable from humans are murdered and raped for fun. Yeah, as long as these robots are not conscious creatures, they aren't really suffering or victims of anything, but there are concerns that the mental effects of engaging in these acts could have very real consequences for very real people. So again, I'm not sure what to think here, and I don't expect you to have all the answers either, since I don't think any of us do. But since this was the topic of your body hacks talk, I'd love to hear your general thoughts on this.
I think it's really important to discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of things, and not just, hey, this tech is coming and it's gonna be great for your life, because a lot of times tech is a double-edged sword for some of us. So I thought it was really important to discuss these things that are coming up that are gritty topics and uncomfortable topics. And I don't even like talking about some of these things or fully imagining the outcomes of some of these things. But anyhow, it's an important thing to do. So at some point, are there going to be like snuff films and torture films and like pornographic interactions like that in VR? Yes, of course. That is going to happen. Somebody's going to do that. And I'm wondering, when things are so photorealistic, in that person's mind, what's the difference between actually doing it and having it happen in a virtual world? I mean, once it gets that photorealistic. And I'm saying, what's the difference for this user, right? Not for the virtual model, because we don't really care about the virtual model, right? But the consequences to this person, I mean, you could have incidences of PTSD that start occurring, from virtual things. I've played some VR games where I think if I got long enough exposure to it, I might get PTSD. It's pretty real sometimes. And some of these survival horror games, I mean, man, they're going to be pretty badass and also terrifying and traumatizing maybe. As a father of two, thinking about some dude, with some robots that look like kids, or like taking photos of my kids, and then applying them to virtual models, that he's doing things with, that's a gritty thing, and that makes me cringe. I don't know how society's going to handle this. I don't know if we're going to say that it's a crime. So I don't know. And that's not really my field. So I'll just kind of leave it up to others to discuss. But fact is that stuff's really not being discussed right now.
Yeah, these conversations are always equal parts fascinating and horrifying. But speaking of the technology-enhanced future of sex, one of the other main projects you've been working on for a while now is the Lovetron 9000. This has been written about by Wired, Men's Health, Gizmodo, and more. So it's getting a lot of attention. But what is it?
The Lovetron 9000 is a vibrating implant that is implanted above a penis. It's actually designed as a clitoral stimulator. I'm certain that different users can find different uses for it. You could turn it on and off at any time, and basically it would vibrate. So pretty basic concept there. I definitely plan on being the alpha tester, and I am working like crazy on this thing right now. There's been all kinds of different hurdles and things like that. And you got to understand too that this is like, it's me trying to do this by myself. Every once in a while, a friend jumps in and helps me for a little while. And, and then as much as they can, but, it's for like little or no pay usually. And so I haven't had the resources to, really just get it done. So this is something that's been in the works since 2011. And I've had like maybe 8 or 9 different versions by this point. At DEF CON a couple of years back, I was really close to having it implanted for that. And right before, I was running some last minute tests, and then the thing just malfunctioned. And I was ready to make incisions, and I was like, I'll just do another quick test, see where it's at, and then and it malfunctioned. And basically, the small reed switch inside had broken and fused together, and it's like stuck in this on-off cycle like continuously. Anyway, so that was a huge design flaw that I had overlooked, and I was kind of back to the drawing board after that, and then had some other hurdles after that I didn't think of. So now at this point, I've got professionals that have contributed basically to the design concept and helped me to refine and modify that. As far as engineering goes, I am in discussions with people right now on the manufacturing end. I've got a good friend who's helping out with the electronic engineering of the circuits and everything like that. And it's basically to the point where we could start prototyping. I could potentially have a prototype in 30 days from now if I can get certain files back. And this factory's got to come up with a good manufacturing document that I sign off on, because we have basically a couple different technical hurdles that we're still trying to navigate. So it always feels like I'm close, but then, I'll come up with a prototype or something like that, and I'll go to testing, and then something fails, and I learn something new. This is something that's never been attempted by anyone else. Even people in medical devices who work with medical implants and things like that have come to me and said, hey, how are you going to handle this? And how, what's your plan for this? Because I see this as a potential, source of failure. And 9 times out of 10, I've already thought of the things that they're bringing up. And, that 1 out of 10 is just super invaluable to me, even if it comes in the form of hostile criticism. Because if there's something that I haven't thought about in my design, I want to know about it now before I implant it and detonate my penis. So,
well, we absolutely want to avoid that. And I never thought I'd say this, but that's actually a perfect transition to my next question. You mentioned the risk of detonation there, and we kind of laugh at that thought, but it's actually a very real concern. And not just for the Lovetron. All of these implants come with dangers up to and including death. And I've never really heard of anything beyond an infection that required the removal of the device, but it can happen, and statistically, it will. Organizations such as the FDA regulate similar devices for medical purposes, but it's not yet clear where these augmentations fit into the picture. How do you work to mitigate the risks and prioritize safety?
Yeah, so the FDA has a list of approved materials, and honestly, a lot of these materials came out around World War II and should not be on this list anymore of grandfathered materials, in my opinion. But they're grandfathered and they're on the list. So I've been through so many different material options and looked at a lot of different things. I think I've settled on 2 main biocompatible materials that will be featured in the Lovetron 9000. But I'm willing to make modifications in later iterations of this thing based on my results and experiences with the first couple prototypes. As far as biocompatibility and things like that, that's paramount. I mean, you've got to have excellent materials, or you just can't implant it. Everything's going to reject, and I'm not going to have any satisfied users, and I've wasted all my money if I'm not using the right materials. The FDA's got a list of basically tests and things like that it goes through, and you don't want to use lead solder and this and that, and they've got their guidelines, which are great and which I'm going to attempt to adhere to 100%. But a lot of these things that I'm going to be using are not currently in medical devices, like vibration motors and things like that. So it's going to be there are some things that the FDA does not regulate at all, and has never encountered before. On things like that, I'm just going to have to do it and code it and bioproof it to the best of my ability and make sure it's safe. But every single material, is going to be interacting with other materials in the device. And not only do you have to worry about the material that's in contact with the tissue, but you've also got to worry about that material interacting with other materials in the device. So for example, if I've got like a titanium shell and on top of that, I've got, let's say, a polyurethane coating or something like that, I got to make sure that my polyurethane is not going to have any issues with being next to that titanium. And, if small fragments of, say, titanium have like shavings or something like that, for whatever reason, have come off and I've got a vibrating motor in there, are those shavings going to be wearing at my polyurethane coating, and how long till it wears through, things like that. So there's all kinds of different things with the materials, like your shear modulus, your, leaching. Is it causing leaching or things like that? So there's a whole checklist, and I'm going to test all that stuff before I go implanting it. I sincerely don't want to blow up anybody's genitals. That's a concern of mine. A lot of people keep pushing me, and they're like, "Hey, where is it? We want it now." And it's got to the point where it's like I don't want to advertise this at all. I don't even want to give out my website because I don't want people interested in it until it's actually ready. If that makes sense.
No, that absolutely makes sense, and I appreciate that you're taking safety seriously. To me, that's paramount, especially when we're talking about potential commercial products. I believe that anyone should be able to do whatever they want with their body and take any risks that they'd like, but everyone should also realize that their actions can impact others, and acting irresponsibly can have negative consequences for the entire community, whether it's in public perception, legal involvement, or unreasonable regulation. Speaking of regulations, there's another field that's no stranger to these questions that you've been dabbling in. While you're mainly associated with the technological augmentation side of biohacking, you've recently begun experimenting with the biology side, specifically using CRISPR for a myostatin knockout, which has been shown to increase muscle growth in animals. What made you want to try your hand with gene editing, and how has that been?
So honestly, since day one, I've been wanting to try my hand out on the gene editing side. Since day one, and back in the day when I first got started in grinding, really all I knew about were AAV viruses for gene therapies and gene editing. And at the time when I got involved in this, like, that was a very, very expensive endeavor, and the costs have just come down so much. And it's really as easy as following like a cookbook recipe or watching a couple YouTube tutorial videos. It's really that simple. And so I basically bought a kit online. Theodin.com is where you go to basically cut your teeth on CRISPR. If you want to get started in CRISPR and learn gene editing, go there. They've got some kits where you could basically hack bacteria to live on a strep media. They've got some other stuff that they're coming out with, but they've got this human plasmid that you could basically put genes onto and then grow in bacteria and purify out in a centrifuge and using a mini prep kit. And then before you know it, you've got this thing that's ready for injection, which could potentially be very dangerous. I don't want any listener thinking that they can just make their own gene therapies and there's potentially no consequences, because you really have to do your homework. It's potentially fatal if you're injecting the wrong thing. So, but yeah, if you do your homework and you want to go after some cool things, whether it's for animals or plants or whatever, DIY bio is just happening right now. It's really happening. So when I saw that the prices had come down and that basically people were doing this on the cheap, and the owner of the Odin had this myostatin knockout that he had developed, I was ecstatic, because I've been hunting down a myostatin knockout for ages. I mean, since I'd say 2004, 2005, I think, was when I first saw the myostatin knockout mice. It's been so long, I can't tell you. But the moment I saw those myostatin knockout mice, I just was like, I need that. I got to get that. And it was just so ridiculously expensive. And I talked to other biohackers, and they're like, yeah, man, like, everyone wants that. We all want that, but it's just so damn expensive. And then, Josiah had developed this thing, and, he's selling it online for $20. And I was like, no way did he just do that. That's something that I've hunted down. And the last quotes I had got on it before were somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000. Of course, that was for a AAV virus, which will produce better results than this plasmid. But still, I was blown away. it's something really remarkable. And if anyone gets a chance to do a Google image search on myostatin knockout dog or knockout mice or something like that, you're going to see some crazy images. These animals are basically just they're huge. They've got all kinds of muscle and like zero body fat. It's amazing. Basically, as soon as I saw it, I was in. I ordered it, failed, ordered it again, and succeeded. And then I've been doing injections like here and there ever since. The only problem is basically when you do an injection, the amount of cells that you're actually transfecting with this new DNA is it's going to be really small in the end. And so it's going to require multiple injections of this plasmid in order to start seeing really good results. Plasmids, though, could be used for other things and have great success, where you don't need to transfect your entire muscular system. And then since then, I've met other biohackers who were working on very similar products, like a follistatin, which inhibits myostatin, which basically will produce the same effect. And when those things become available, wow, I mean, that's going to have a huge impact, not just for biohackers, athletes, and bodybuilders and things like that, but I mean, just on society in general. Potentially, one injection could mean the end of obesity. So that's another thing I talked about in my body hacking con talk is the potential end of obesity, like, with a single shot, every 10 years or something like that, could potentially eliminate obesity in the majority of the population. And then, we have another set of questions that emerges after that is, which is, what's happening to our biodiversity and body type diversity at that point.
Yeah, those are very serious questions that we need to be thinking about. And how long have you been doing the injections? You mentioned that you haven't necessarily seen any positive effects yet, but perhaps even more importantly, have you noticed anything negative?
No, I haven't seen any negative consequences. Part of it, too, is I've also not been going to the gym. And I did experience a back injury recently that limited my mobility and the amount of exercise and weight I can lift and things like that. That put me on my butt for quite a few weeks. So I'm really behind as far as working out and things like that. I think I started this back in January.
You mentioned earlier that you don't have a background in biology and that a lot of this work is as simple as following a recipe. But listening to you, you certainly sound more versed in this than you're letting on. What has the learning curve been like? How long did it take until you felt that you were proficient enough to try this?
Oh, yeah. So the first time I tried it, I failed. My culture wasn't working out. And so I didn't get it. I didn't understand why. So I asked around online and people said, oh, you know what? It's not getting enough air. Are you using a shaker? Is this incubated? Your culture looks too clear. It should be cloudier. And so anyway, basically after just asking around online, I figured out my problem and it was an easy fix. And so, I went back and successfully made the culture, followed all the steps on the manual for the mini prep, and that was that. Yeah, it really is that easy. It's just a series of instructions you just follow.
There is a lot of concern in the general public that human enhancement technologies will exacerbate the problem of income inequality and could actually end up making class stratifications even more pronounced, to the point that we have a superhuman, super intelligent elite class that has access to this technology and a lower class that does not. I know that you are very much in favor of democratized access to this technology, so what steps are you taking to make that a reality?
Well, I think one thing that is extremely important to democratizing technology is to actually make it. I know a lot of people who are afraid of stratification in classes would argue, we shouldn't be developing these technologies until we have a fair way to distribute them. I hear this argument a lot, but I think that that's folly. I think you actually have to make it, and then worry about that. Otherwise, it's just make believe. It's not playing with anything tangible. So I think that that's the most important piece of the puzzle there, is to actually make the thing, and then have the conversation about distribution. So I'm a firm believer, though, that if there is anything that's going to be stratifying, at least me as a biohacker, I feel an obligation to make sure that thing is going to be open source, It's not going to be secret forbidden knowledge that somebody's sitting on. So to make sure that happens, I mean, we're talking reverse engineering if needs be, and patent theft or whatever it's going to take. Because if we're talking about something that can stratify all of society, then most likely this is going to have some, human rights things attached to it too, that we need to look at. Basically, if it's giving somebody that much more of an advantage, then it's a human rights issue, I think. And it shouldn't be left up to like rich or poor. And so, as biohackers, we're really clever at basically stripping things down and reducing costs dramatically and, coming out with like knockoff versions. So I know a lot of people will disagree with this, but I'm basically all in favor of making knockoff versions for technologies that, fall into this classification, just in the name of fair distribution and cheaper prices and universal access.
As we wrap up here, we'll move on to a fun one. I'm always asked to make predictions, and I always find that difficult. So instead, I'm going to approach this from an angle that I much prefer. What is your vision for the future?
My vision for the future is kind of frighteningly not aligned with many other people's visions of the future, but ideally, I'd like to see a world where we have people that are biologically fluid. So that means you can change all kinds of different traits about yourself. Like somebody dyes their hair. For myself personally, I'd like to have like different parts of my body that I could just swap in and out with different components and attachments and things like that. And basically kind of like I call it like the Mr. Potato Head model of transhumanism, right? Where you just got these sockets, you could put a new thing in this socket, or a new thing in this other socket, and just have interchangeable parts and things like that. So I don't see that being really popular. I think a lot of people want to, have an ideal in mind, and they want to work towards that ideal look that everybody else is working towards. I'd like to see more diversity. So I'd like to see people make some crazy biological modifications. I'm going for the Cronenberg timeline. I want to see some really crazy stuff. People that are using sunlight for a portion of their calorie intake, through different genetic modifications, all kinds of different stuff. So in my ideal worldview, we all basically shake hands and walk away from each other. And everybody evolves in their own way and acts like their body is their own canvas and become very unique. And we can hopefully appreciate all the diversity and differences and not try to strive toward this one ideal.
When you said that your vision for the future was frighteningly unaligned with most, I was a bit concerned. But I think that an explosion of diversity sounds completely reasonable. You mentioned during your talk at Body Hacks that you were concerned about a potential lack of diversity, that people would all move towards the same standard of beauty. I'm not so sure that will be the case. One criticism that I often hear of transhumanism is that, yes, you say that you want to make humans better, but better is a subjective term, and who is defining that? We certainly don't want the Third Reich to be defining society's idea of a better humanity, for example. But to me, when I say I want to improve the human condition and make a better future, I mean that on an individual level. No one should be forcing their goals or ideas on others. Your definition of better should be your own and should be based on your goals. And I think that's exactly what you're describing here. People becoming what they want and living life how they want without coercion or subjugation. This is a message that is missing in some transhumanist spaces, where I've seen questions of what people should be able to do and what level of morphological freedom should be tolerated. And it's ridiculous. Bodily autonomy needs to be preserved and respected on a fundamental level. And I think that's a great parting message, so I appreciate you bringing it up. And even more than that, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's always great to speak with you.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan, anytime.
Hey everyone, Ryan O'Shea again, and thanks for listening to my interview with Rich Lee. Once again, we remind you that the thoughts of the guests on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Future Grind or myself, and also a reminder that biohacking is dangerous and things can go wrong. I strongly advise against self-surgery of any kind, and you should consult with a trained medical doctor before moving forward with any type of human augmentation. Remember to check out the show notes and more at futuregrind.org. Make sure to subscribe, and you can also like, comment, and share to spread the word. Till next time, this is Future Grind.